They were the kids nobody watched. Not because they weren't loved, but because both parents were working, and the world hadn't figured out what to do with that yet. So they came home to an empty house. They made their own snack. They figured out their own homework. They learned, very early, that no one was coming to fix things for them. Think about that for a moment. An entire generation raised on independence before independence was even a choice. While other generations grew up with constant guidance, Generation X grew up with a key around their neck. A house key. A latchkey. That's actually what people called them. Latchkey kids. It sounds almost sad when you say it out loud. But something unexpected happened inside all that solitude. They became resourceful. Because when nobody's watching, you either figure it out, or you don't. There was no smartphone to call for help. No group chat to ask what to do. Just a phone on the wall, and a number written on a piece of paper. If something broke, you fixed it. If you got hurt, you dealt with it. If you were bored, you found something to do. Nobody scheduled their creativity for them. Have you ever noticed how some people just seem unshakable? Calm in a crisis? Able to handle bad news without falling apart? Often, that's a Gen Zer. Because they were raised in uncertainty long before uncertainty became a headline. They watched their parents divorce at record-breaking rates. They watched the economy shift beneath their feet. They grew up between two worlds. Too young to be boomers. Too old to be millennials. Nobody was really talking about them. And maybe that's exactly what made them so strong. When you're not the center of attention, you stop performing for approval. You start solving problems instead. Generation X didn't wait for permission to grow up. They just did it. Some of them raised younger siblings. Some of them held down jobs while still in high school. Some of them learned how to read a rune long before they learned how to read a contract. And here's something people rarely mention. They were also the last generation to experience real boredom. Not scrolling. Not swiping. Actual, uninterrupted, staring at the ceiling boredom. And that boredom did something valuable. It forced their brains to wander. To imagine. To invent games with rules nobody else understood. Boredom, it turns out, builds problem solvers. Discomfort, it turns out, builds resilience. Think about the world they had to adapt to. They learned to use a rotary phone. Then a pager. Then a flip phone. Then the internet. Then social media. Without ever getting a manual for any of it. Every single transition, they figured out on their own. No tutorials. No influencers explaining the algorithm. Just trial, error, and stubborn persistence. That kind of constant adaptation leaves a mark. It builds a mind that doesn't panic when the ground shifts. Because the ground has always been shifting. There's also something quieter beneath all this. Generation X learned early that emotions were often private. Not because feelings didn't matter, but because nobody had time to sit down and talk about them. So they learned to carry things internally. To keep moving. To handle it later, or never, and survive either way. That's not always healthy. But it is, undeniably, strong. Maybe that's the real lesson here. Strength doesn't usually come from being protected. It comes from being left alone long enough to learn how to protect yourself. Generation X didn't ask to be forgotten in the middle. But somewhere in that gap, between two louder generations, they quietly built something most people never noticed. A kind of steadiness that doesn't need applause. A kind of resilience that doesn't need an audience. And maybe, after all these years, that's exactly why they became so strong.